In 2020, I found myself in prison. I'll admit, this wasn't on my vision board as a kid, but I was there on business. I have a PhD in human communication. I study how we make meaning, how we connect, how we human, in fact. I went to prison for research asking two big questions. How do we explain the presence of gender violence, and how do we solve it? For answers, I spent months and months alongside men who had perpetrated violence against their partners, listening closely to the stories they told about their childhoods, about relationships, and about being men. But I didn't find what I expected. These weren't monsters. They were just guys. Guys who'd been taught that winning was key to their manhood. Or, as one guy taught me, I've learned to win at all costs since I was a kid. It started, he said, with musical chairs. I could push, I could pull. It was all fair game as long as I won. And the more I won, he said, the less I cared about others. That hit me hard. In that moment, I suddenly remembered my own indoor middle school carnival when I was obsessed with musical chairs. Do you remember the game? You walk in a circle of chairs, and when the music stops, you sit. But there's always one less chair than players, so each round, someone's out until there's one chair left for two people. If you snag that chair, you win. As I played, my blood pumping, I was determined. See, I grew up in a household where sugar was like gold. I had to win. When we were down to that last chair and the music stopped, I yanked that chair toward me, slipped my leg in front, threw my hip like a jujitsu master, pushed, and plopped down. I'd done it. I was faster, better even. And while my opponents drooped in disappointment, I claimed my chocolate cake like the winner I was. Had I cheated? Maybe. I didn't have anyone to share that cake with, that much I know. I just jujitsu'd all my friends out of the way in my own quest to win. But this brings me back to prison, to the men I studied and interviewed who had perpetrated violence. For so many of them, masculinity meant winning at all cost. It was part of being a man. But at what cost? When relationships become like musical chairs, violence is the tool used to secure that seat. But that violence, it isn't a monster problem. It's a meaning problem. I came to that realization after hours, each week in a months-long prison intervention group. In each group, men sitting in a circle surrounded by cameras and barbed wire, I helped facilitate difficult conversations about gender, power, and accountability. What I'm sharing today isn't surface. It's from years of research developed through deep, difficult, and messy dialogue. Over and over, I saw these guys just trying to be men as they'd learned masculinity. That role required them to win, to be strong, pitiless, decisive, a leader. But here's the rub. Winning requires a loser. And there's no finish line in a relationship, no scoreboard. When they couldn't reach winning, they would chase the feeling of being right, of getting their way. Winning became control. And when that feeling disappeared, something destabilizing happened. I heard a version of it over and over. If you make me feel like a loser, watch out. That losing feels like annihilation. And for men who've never questioned or been given a language for those feelings, violence fills in the gaps. It communicates what they feel entitled to enact. I will not be made small. But how can love survive winners and losers? Let me tell you the story about one guy, AJ. AJ grew up watching his macho dad, who demanded subservience from AJ's mom and used violence to get it. AJ, he desperately didn't want to be his dad, but his dad was the model for what he was supposed to become. Because violence allowed AJ's dad to control the outcome. When AJ's male role models would raise their voice or raise their fist, they got what they wanted. Violence worked. When I asked AJ why he'd used violence in his own relationships, he said, I don't know why. It's just, I'm the man, I'm the boss. Losing isn't an option. That can't be bad, right? That last question, that can't be bad, right, isn't rhetorical. He genuinely didn't know the answer. The story that AJ had inherited told him that winning was key to his manhood. It was his birthright. It was the whole point. When he was pressed further, well, what does winning look like in a relationship? What happens if you feel like you're losing? The perceived threat to masculinity was the most common context for violence. The message of that violence was, now I'll force you to understand what I can't find another way to say in order to get my way. But AJ, he isn't unique. And he didn't invent the language of violence. It comes from somewhere, from parents and role models, from movies and politicians, from every unquestioned cultural story that says real men win, they dominate, they don't compromise. When we assume the traits of men are the traits of winners, and winners are who we give power to, who we respect, losing is high stakes. All of us lose more than just a cake. But this is more than a prison story or even a men's only story, because the language of violence is pervasive. It spreads across relationship types. From our daily commute and into the workplace, anyone can use the language of violence, though women, trans, gender-expansive folks are much more likely to experience the lethal and devastating consequences of that violence. I want to be clear about that. Any of us can perpetuate harm. But I'm going to be honest with you. When I first stepped into prison, that was something I resisted. Me? Perpetuate harm? No, no way. I mean, look at these guys. Compared to them, I'm looking pretty good. That distance between here and there, it felt like safety. It created a comparison, a shield of rationalization. Pass the blame, move the buck. Comparison allows us to create distance by leveling up and pointing down. It stops us from asking hard questions about how I perpetuate harm in my own life, how I silence or dominate, how I choose being right over being connected. Comparison allows us to avoid looking at ourselves by pointing somewhere else to our coworkers, to our partners, to the monsters. The men I studied did this too. They'd point to their neighbors in prison and say, well, I would never do what he did. I'm not that bad. They'd point backward in time to their partners also and say, well, they started it. Or she's done way worse than I have. Comparison allows us to feel like winners without ever changing our behavior or questioning our destructiveness. It's sleight of fist. Well, yeah, I hit her, but look over there. That comparison protects me, but accountability can transform us. You know, when AJ first went into prison, he thought he'd do his time and be done. He went in knowing what he'd always known, that weakness is dangerous, and that if someone makes you feel like a loser, you remember, they better watch out. That's not a monster talking. That's a man who learned his lines really, really well. Near the end of our time together, AJ became terrified, and not of the other men or prison necessarily. He was afraid of something much harder, trying to live a different way. Because to do so he looked at all of the behaviors he once called strength and asked, have these destroyed everything I love? Are these the tools of destruction? That's where accountability actually starts. Not, I had a bad day, or I snapped. Accountability says we have to change the rules of the game entirely because this isn't working. And that's what AJ did, slowly, vulnerably, over time with everyone else in that group. He told the bad stories about himself, where his actions harmed someone, and then he made plans to do better. When I asked him what it felt like to share and to listen to everyone in that room, he said, powerful. It's powerful to have the courage to do that. Now, here's where I come in, and you do too. Because I told you I went to prison as a researcher. What I didn't tell you is that prison came home with me. Week after week, listening to these men decode their need to win, I started hearing myself. Not their stories exactly, but some of the same reflex. That hot, tight feeling when my husband and I are arguing, and I stop trying to understand him and start trying to defeat him. The stonewalling, the passive aggression, the look, diminishing him without ever raising my voice and then telling myself I didn't do anything wrong because, well, I'm not like them or him or whoever. That strategy protected me for a long time. It also kept me from changing and kept us from growing. Instead, I had to tell the bad stories about myself. Ones where I wasn't a feminist researcher studying harm from a safe distance. I was in it, contributing to it, in different ways, with different impacts, yes, but with some of that same logic, the same scoreboard, the same desperate need not to feel like a loser. I had to ask if I had the courage like AJ, to name it, to change it together. That's the opportunity. But I won't lie to you. Accountability requires courage, but accountability is our way out of this, not always by focusing out, but by also starting to focus in. So, here's 3 things that you can start today. First, tell a bad story about yourself out loud to someone where your actions harm someone else. And not for sympathy, for accountability. Accountability says, these were my behaviors, my actions had an impact, and here's how I'm going to communicate differently. Not, well, I already apologized, or I feel bad enough. It says, here's how I'm going to change, and then practice changing. I'm not asking you to live in the bad forever or stay there, and if you don't know how to move forward, ask. Be curious, communicate. How can I do better? Second, get ahead of the scoreboard. Don't wait. Reflect with me right now and ask, when does the need to win show up in me? When you're interrupted? Or if we dig deeper, are you like me? Is it when you feel unsupported or like you're too much? You can't stop a reflex if you can't recognize it. The men I studied, they weren't unfeeling. They were drowning in feelings that they didn't have a language for. When that reflex shows up, and it will, breathe and ask yourself, what am I feeling? Where does this come from, and what's that about? It's not when you have the reflex, it's what you do in the 10 seconds before you act in a way that you can't take back. And third, practice perspective taking. To care about others in the world, we have to understand our impact on them. How might they be feeling? How might my actions impact her? Perspective taking moves us from a language of violence to a language of connection and understanding. There's just one more thing. This isn't just personal work. This is cultural work. We need something stronger than any one of us as individuals can achieve alone, and we need something stronger than punishment. We need prevention. In our homes, our schools, in the resources we provide. We need to change what winning looks like and for who by questioning the cultural stories we tell and the expectations they enact. And we need to believe survivors, not when it's convenient, but as a practice, because we're everywhere. And what was crystal clear in my research is that this violence exists. And not just out there where we can point to behind prison walls, it's here with us culturally in our desire to win and dominate and in using harm to get our way. That winning, it protects me, but accountability can transform all of us. And it starts awkwardly, imperfectly, by learning from one bad story at a time. There's hope in the bad stories. humanity even. The courage to tell a bad story, our bad story, and change it. That's how we stop this. It's how we stop playing musical chairs with our lives. Thank you.